Okay, thank you for joining us today. My name is Anthony Verdon. I am the Horticulture Small Farms Extension Agent for Johnson County. And today for Dig Your Dinner, our topic is horseradish and parsnips. I'll be your host today. Chelsea is out. She did leave a recording for us, so she is going to be speaking on the nutrition and preservation and serving aspects of horseradish and parsnips later on in a recording. But first up, I'm going to teach you about the growing aspects here. You may be asking why horseradish and parsnips? Well, the answer is that there are a few obscure crops out there that we do have to cover at some point in this series, right? We've hit a lot of the main ones or the popular ones, but horseradish and parsnips, it can be very enticing as well. Luckily, these are both very simple crops to be able to grow, but there are some facets that you want to try to keep in mind as you are working with them for the best success. So we're going to go over those, and then we will get into Chelsea's information. So with every one of these, I like to give people some publications right off the bat that they may find interesting or useful as they're trying to grow these crops. The Kansas Garden Guide is, of course, an excellent resource for anyone trying to grow vegetables in their garden in Kansas. And it goes over everything from, your pest control to different seasons and ways to grow in those seasons to season extension and watering and soil pH. And your horseradish and parsnips are well covered in this as well. Parsnips has its own page. Horseradish itself actually falls within the herbs category. So it doesn't have a ton of information on horseradish, but you can find various snippets and tidbits throughout the garden guide that can help you out. Otherwise, there are, of course, other extension publications out there from across the country. One that I always like to recommend is from the University of Minnesota because they have a great resource guide on really every kind of vegetable you can grow in the garden. So they do have one that is growing horseradish in home gardens, and specifically for your horseradish. And then as far as parsnips they have partnered those with carrots and growing carrots and parsnips in home gardens. So you can find that on their website and really any kind of extension website. You would just search the crop you're looking for plus .edu, and that would bring up a lot of results as far as different types of extension publications you can find. Of course, keep in mind that the further away from Kansas or the Kansas City area that those publications are published, obviously the growing conditions are going to vary. So you'll want to pay attention to things like climatic conditions and water and soil types and pH that are going to be different. So looking first at horseradish, horseradish again falls into the herb category. It is a large leafed European herb. It's been used for 3,000 years. It's very, very popular. And Chelsea will go into its uses and really uh, how prevalent it can be used in dishes. But obviously, it's a spicy herb and it's very popular for many reasons. So it thrives primarily in temperate climates, is one of the things that you want to keep in mind. When I say temperate, that means that it is not a noticeable extremes that they're going to be growing in. So really, your herbs, again, that they're leafy greens. Generally, they like those non-extremes to try to be growing in. So it's going to be kind of cool temperatures. It's going to be moist. It's going to be cushiony for them to be growing. So not extreme temperature variation, moderate temperatures in general. So really from your 40 degrees to your 70 degrees, and then even regular rainfall is the location where they grow naturally. So when you're paying attention to moisture for this crop, you again want to try to aim for an even moisture in the grounds. It does grow best in a deep and rich loam. If you don't know what a loam is, it is a mixture of soil that has equal parts sand, silt, and clay. So if you do have a clay pan in your yard that you're trying to grow crops in, horseradish would probably not be the best option, or you'd want to try for a raised bed or something on those lines, because it does have a very deep root, obviously, right? So it has to penetrate the ground quite easily. Otherwise, it's going to be deformed or it's just not going to perform well for you. Also, with horseradish, it is one of the few crops that you are going to be allowing to grow all season long and then some. And that is actually one of the things that it has in common with parsnips, which we'll talk about in a bit here. But yeah, your horseradish, you actually don't harvest until the season has really ended. But first, when it comes to planting and when we're talking about planting, you want to choose a full sun location. All of your vegetables in general are going to enjoy a full sun location. So that means 6+ hours of direct sunlight within a day. Like most vegetables as well, enjoys a fertile soil that is 6.0 to 7.0 pH, so just slightly acidic. And then when you are actually planting these, you do want to try to add a fertilizer just to give it a little bit of feeding right from the get-go. So it is recommended to add a 10-10-10 fertilizer mixed into the soil that it will be growing in. Because this is a crop that is so deep rooting, this is one of the few that you really do have to quite work the ground when you are trying to get it in, when you are getting it planted, because it needs to be able to grow quite deep. So, you may be trying to observe no-till practices. This would really be an exception where a tiller is necessary or a spade shovel, but you're going to have to break up that soil quite a bit so that it can be soft, at least 10 inches deep. You do also want to try to avoid adding fresh or composted manure when you are incorporating these crops, and that is because there are a lot of side effects that can happen with that manure. It is essentially it has too much nutrients for a leafy green, so you're going to get excessive top growth and forked roots if you do and try to incorporate a manure. So try to avoid that because you do want nutrients in there, but you want it in the lower range. Also allow for the worked soil to settle for a few days because that is just going to avoid those air pockets that could cause problems otherwise. This is a crop that is vegetatively propagated, meaning that when you are going to plant it in your garden, you are taking pieces of the crop itself to plant it. You're not using seeds. These pieces are called sets sometimes. So if you are looking to allocate them or find a good place to purchase them, you would likely refer to them as your horseradish sets. And you want to plant them in early spring as soon as the ground thaws. So really, it is the entire growing season that you are trying to grow your horseradish. You'll plant it as soon as it thaws, and then as right before it freezes, that is when it comes out. Space the sets either facing upward or at a 45-degree angle. And this is just a matter of preference. So ideally, when it comes to harvesting, it just means that you don't want those roots growing in every which direction, either having them grow upward or leaning. That is going to help you out when it comes to getting them out of the ground because you're not going to be breaking them apart as you dig towards them to pry them out of the ground. When you do place those sets in the ground, aim for 2 inches to 3 inches of topsoil on top of those roots. So you are planting them quite deep, depending on the size of the set itself. You may be planting it 10 inches deep, and then you want another 3 inches on top of that just to give it some room to grow upward. Weed control is quite important when you are establishing your horseradish, especially in those early months. That's just because it can easily be outcompeted if you've got a bunch of top growth on top before the leaves of the horseradish itself can poke through. So cultivating in the same direction as you have planted is going to help you out, meaning when you go through with a garden hoe, you want to match the angle that you have planted your roots, because otherwise you could see some damage to those roots. And that is obviously not the desire when you are trying to harvest those roots as a crop. Mulching as well is going to help you out in this scenario for weed control, but it's also going to help you keep that even soil moisture that we had mentioned. And it's going to help with a more temperature controlled soil moisture as well. So those temperate conditions that we're aiming for, it's going to help you out there. So there is a practice with horseradish that is called lifting and stripping that is done twice a year. And this is important for high quality horseradish. So you can technically allow horseradish to grow and not dig it up twice a year, and you're still going to get roots that you can harvest. But if you're really aiming for the high quality horseradish that you could purchase in a store, for example, what you have to do is after the leaves are 8 inches to 10 inches long, that is the first time you will dig it up. And then you will strip off essentially all of the auxiliary roots. Any of those little pieces that are hanging off on the side, you want to remove those. Any forks of tiny pieces, you want to remove those. And then you're going to replant it. And then 6 weeks after that, you're going to do the same thing again. And that is going to help just encourage that main taproot that is thick and that is easily usable as a crop that is very high quality for you. So keep that in mind. That there is a little bit of maintenance in this when it comes to encouraging the most desirable of a crop. To do that, you'll want to carefully remove the soil and take all but the best taproots off the sides, as I mentioned. But really, you're going to have to dig it from the outward in, and we'll talk about that here in the harvesting. So when it comes to harvesting, it's very similar to harvesting, say, sweet potatoes or really any kind of your root crops, right? Your sweet potatoes or your potatoes in general. You're going to start from the outside with a broad fork, and you're going to pry the ground up and gradually work your way inward. So you're not stabbing the crop or breaking the crop. One of the things you do have to keep in mind, however, is that these roots are very, very deep, so they can snap very easily. So you really do need to get probably at least a foot deep and pry from the outside in to try to get those out of the ground. Once you do have them out of the ground, you can trim the tops. You want to try to leave at least an inch of the leaves on top, but otherwise the rest can be removed. And then you'll just brush the soil off with a garden brush rather than washing them right away. That is because you don't want to encourage rot in those root crops. But after or when it is time to actually utilize them, that is when you can wash them thoroughly and get all the soil away from it. One of the primary issues you're going to see with horseradish specifically is flea beetles. They really love to eat the leaves of horseradish. And if they're severe enough, they can defoliate the plant enough that you're not going to have much root growth. So there are a few different options here. One of the more effective options that I've seen as far as organic controls go is actually insect netting. You really do have to use a fine mesh netting to be able to do this, but I've seen many gardens recently, especially our backyard garden demonstration garden with the master gardeners over at the Olathe Research Center. They have done this year and seen quite a bit of effectiveness with using a mesh netting to try to keep your flea beetles out of a crop stand. So that is something that you'll have to stay on top of right away. It's kind of anticipating that they'll show up and get there before they do with that mitigation efforts, but definitely something worth trying. Trap crops are another great option. So you could plant mustard or bok choy nearby, and most likely the flea beetles are going to flock to those crops instead, which you can then treat and not consume. And that is that essentially happens just because they prefer those crops over your horseradish. So another great option. Neem oil is another organic option. And then I do have here pyrethrins and spinosad. Those two are organic, but they are non-selective in the pests that they treat. So they will kill your beneficials as well. So you really want to use them sparingly and really just the most severe cases. And then when you do use them, be sure you're using them early in the morning or late at night so that you are avoiding any awake pollinators. The pollinators are going to go to bed eventually, and you're just less likely to be treating them specifically during those times of day. So moving on to parsnips, as you can see, they do look quite similar to our horseradish, but they're more similar to carrots specifically as far as the way that they are grown. That is why that one publication basically had them listed together because they have the exact same soil requirements. That is because they are both deep rooting, wide rooting or crops, so that need a loose soil and grow best in a sandy loam. The way that these are planted is you want to direct sow seeds into the ground. So as opposed to your horseradish, where you're taking a piece or you are vegetatively transplanting, that is not an option with these. You do not want to disturb them and then replant them. You want to just put a seed into the ground and allow it to grow. They do have quite dainty seeds, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But as far as other requirements, it does have a very long growing season. So I mentioned this with the horseradish, where you essentially allow it to grow all season. Your parsnips, you can actually allow to grow all season and into next season. So it just really depends on how much size and growth you want them to have. But there are certain varieties, and it is variety dependent, that you can plant in March and you can allow to harvest next March. It does just depend on which one you're going with. So when it comes to planting, you want to sow your seeds in mid-March to early April, same time as your beets and your carrots. and these will just be planted at a ½ inch depth, 2 inches to 4 inches apart. You're wanting to remember that they do get pretty wide roots, so try to remember the spacing on there, just to allow some room for them to grow and widen. Use fresh seeds because parsnips in particular, they lose seed viability quite quickly. So don't try to reuse some from last year. The chance is high that they are not going to sprout for you. Pelleted seeds or seed tape may be helpful in this scenario just because they are, as I mentioned, very dainty seeds. So we haven't mentioned seed tape before in this series, so I figured I'd touch on that real quick. It can be done very easily. The easiest way really is probably just to take a toilet paper roll, and you can use the strips and as long as you want them to be, by obviously tearing the toilet paper at its perforations. And then what you'll do is you'll make a flour paste. So it's just a matter of mixing flour and water and then dabbing that paste at the recommended spacing. So in this case, 2 inches to 4 inches apart. And then after you have those dabs on the paper, you would just place your seeds onto those dabs, allow that to dry, and then you can lay out your paper into the garden and bury it at the depth that is recommended for burying it. Then you would water it as you normally would, and those would eventually sprout for you. So when it comes to parsnip germination, you also want to keep in mind that this is a crop that's going to take quite a while to germinate. It could take close to a month for you to see growth from this plant. So don't assume right away that the seeds weren't viable or that your crop has failed. You could still see them pop up, and you need to allocate at least 3 weeks to be able to start seeing that growth. Watch for soil crusting, however, because soil crusting is one of the factors with your parsnips and your carrots that can really hinder those seedlings from thriving. What causes soil crusting is essentially you get too much water in there. Say there's been a big rain event, and that top inch of soil, the particles within it. Say you have a heavy silt or heavy clay, it creates a very hard layer for seedlings to be able to grow through. So you want to try to avoid soil crusting. You can do that by incorporating a compost or a peat moss, or just trying to make sure that you have a fluffy soil for them to grow in. As far as watering, these are another one that want your good and consistent soil moisture. It is kind of important to keep that consistent soil moisture. You really don't want it to be drying out very often, because with that dry soil, it is going to encourage a bitterness, a toughness, misshapenness, or undersized roots. You'll also probably see forking of the roots. Again, not something that's necessarily desirable, especially when you're trying to harvest. That fork is likely to break. So generally that equates to 1 inch of rain per week, or enough water to moisten the soil 6 inches deep within the ground. So when it comes to harvesting, again, this is one of those ones you want to start from the outward end and just be really careful, because these have even deeper roots than your horseradish. They can be up to a foot long. So you really have to get down deep and be careful not to snap them off halfway through. Leaving the ground until late fall or early spring. Again, it's dependent on your variety, but these actually can be overwintered. So it takes about a season and a quarter. And then you actually want to get them out of the ground before the heat of the spring arrives, because with that, it's going to harm the quality of the plants. But leaving them through the winter will actually increase the quality of flavor. It will increase the sugars that develop within the roots. So that is something to keep in mind, is that you're going to get some pretty good flavor out of it. But yes, as soon as the soil warms up, it's going to start bolting, and then that flavor is going to rapidly worsen. So there's a window where you have to get them out in early spring. Some issues that you may see with parsnips: cutworms and aster yellows are two things that are listed, but I don't think they're super common. They're just something to keep in mind. If you are seeing those issues, feel free to reach out to the extension office, and we'll give you the best recommendation for your scenario, because it is kind of going to depend on just how severe it is, what other crops you have nearby. A lot of times, or if you have aster yellows, it's just get it out of the ground so it doesn't spread to your other stuff. Again, the recommendation will vary, so just reach out to us and we'll help you out. There are many physiological disorders that you may see with this. As I mentioned, forked roots can be a thing, which encourages breaking when you're harvesting them. That is almost always due to soil compaction, so just make sure you're planting in a very loose soil. And then you also may see very leafy tops with very small roots. This can be due to overcrowding. That's very common. So they've just been planted way too close. Or if you've added way too much nitrogen to your soil, you'll see a lot of leafy growth, but not a lot of root growth. So be careful with your fertilization as well. Another issue that is not related to the plant itself, but you may see some skin sensitivity specifically with this plant and the leaves. If it is a hot day, a lot of people will see irritation on their arms or hands because they've been working in parsnip leaves. So just be aware of that and wear gloves and long sleeves. And finally, before we get to Chelsea's part, I do want to mention something fun. So, did you know that horseradish and parsnips often used to get mixed up in old European dishes since they look similar and are both harvested in late winter or fall? Recipes would often denote to add a white root, and that was it. They didn't give the actual name of the plant. So, this would cause a lot of weird dishes for people. The mix up would alter them entirely, and they would either be way more spicy than they were supposed to be or way more sweet than they were supposed to be. So with that, before I go to Chelsea's part, are there any questions on growing parsnips or horseradish? Okay, well, feel free to throw those in the chat if you do have questions. And I will now switch my screen or attempt to switch my screen to the recording that Chelsea has provided us with. Yeah.
My name is Chelsea King, and I am the Nutrition, Food Safety, and Health Agent. And I'm going to talk about the nutrition and culinary ways to prepare horseradish and parsnips. So first, we know that horseradish is very pungent and almost hot tasting for a lot of people. The pungency of horseradish is actually diminished during the cooking process. So if you are trying to reduce the pungency of it, adding it in your dish and cooking it is going to help reduce that pungency. Using it raw or adding it at the end of the cooking flavor is going to give you the strongest flavor. So if you like that bite and you're looking for that pungency of that horseradish, making sure that it's raw or add it at the end is going to give you the best results. We know that horseradish goes with a variety of different dishes. So here are just some of the common flavor affinities that you might find in different pairings of horseradish. Horseradish and apples and pork go well together. Beef and beets and horseradish. Horseradish is also a great addition for seafoods and then mixed with some tomatoes to help with that acidity. And then just a basic kind of horseradish sauce, which is going to have some of that garlic and olive oil as well. So what's with the heat? The hotness from the horseradish actually comes from isocyanates, which is a volatile compound that when it reacts with air and our saliva is when it generates that heat usually. So grating it and grinding it breaks those cells, releasing more of that compound. Same with onions and garlic. The more you chop it up or the more you finely grind it, the more it breaks those cells, releasing some of that flavor and that traditional texture, or excuse me, that traditional heat or spiciness that we generally find in garlic, onions, and horseradish. The interesting thing that adding vinegar immediately after you grate or grind it stops that reaction with that volatile compound when it reacts with the air and the saliva, and it then will help to stabilize that flavor. So if you are doing it fresh, adding a little bit of vinegar, any type of vinegar works, and then it will keep that reaction and stabilize that flavor. When we talk about the nutrition, from a nutritional standpoint, because horseradish is consumed in such small quantities, we really don't think of it as like a staple of fruit or vegetable in terms of the quantity that's consumed. It's generally more as a condiment or mixed in as a small ingredient into a recipe. But here is the nutrition information for you. A tablespoon of prepared horseradish is about 7 calories, 2 grams of carbohydrates, 1 gram of protein, 0.5 grams of fiber, and it does have calcium, potassium, magnesium, and folate. I did not put the percent of your daily value in there again, just because it is such small quantities that we consume that it makes a minimal dent compared to our other fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and different foods that we might eat that have a larger contribution to our micronutrients, our vitamins and minerals that we consume on a daily basis. Although there's not a lot of vitamins, minerals nutritionally when we think about horseradish, it does actually have some health benefits. So horseradish has a lot of antioxidants, and antioxidants are what protects our cell. Research has shown that several antioxidants may prevent cancer and prevent oxidation of those cells. Horseradish is also anti-inflammatory, meaning that it can help reduce inflammation. So this is great to have as a condiment, especially if you have chronic inflammation or you're dealing with arthritis or other conditions. There is some research that also shows it is antibacterial. So it could potentially help to keep you healthy. There has been some research that has looked at like E. coli or other bacterias that come, and using horseradish as a way to also help prevent sickness and illness from those. However, again, the quantities that you consume are very low. So the research is not really strong evidence on the benefits of consuming fresh horseradish when you consume it just as an ingredient. Homemade prepared horseradish is probably the most common way that people consume horseradish. A couple tips with prepare if you make homemade prepared horseradish, making sure that you're wearing glasses or keeping it out of your eyes, especially if you're grating it. Those juices can actually kind of splash up a little bit. So making sure that you're wearing protective gloves as well could be another option. And there is that really strong horseradish smell from those fumes. So making sure that you're doing it in an open area, opening a window or having a fan going or something like that. If you've ever cooked a lot of peppers before or worked with peppers, it's kind of something similar that you're going to have just this really strong smell. You are going to peel that fresh horseradish root, removing the dark veins, and then you're going to cut it into small pieces and use a food processor or grater to finely chop it, as you can see in this picture. As I mentioned in the previous slide, adding that vinegar to your horseradish right as you prepare it is going to help with that chemical reaction, kind of taking that bite and that pungency down just a little bit. And you do want to make sure that that vinegar and adding a little bit of cold water as well, covering the horseradish, is going to give you the best result. You can add a little bit of that salt, and then you're just going to keep it in the refrigerator until you are ready to use it in whatever preparation or whatever recipe you are going to be using it for. Homemade horseradish sauce is probably another common one. We think of this as like our traditional like tartar sauce or other type of sauce that you might use for fish or for sandwiches. So here's just kind of some main steps. It's not a specific recipe to follow, but it does give you some ideas on making your own homemade horseradish sauce. So generally the homemade horseradish sauce is going to have some butter. It kind of helps with that mouthfeel and that texture, adds a little bit of flavor. So you're going to create a roux to start with, which is basically melting some of that butter and whisking in some flour. And then you're going to add some milk in half and half, and you're going to kind of stir that until it's thickened. And then you're going to remove it from the heat, and that's when you're going to add your spices. So you can usually use any spices you want, salt, a little sugar to kind of counter the heat, some mustard, pepper, and some people even add some nutmeg into their horseradish sauce. And then you're going to stir in that prepared horseradish that was from the previous slide and a little bit of that fresh squeezed lemon juice. And so again, this is more just that cream-based type sauce, where the other slide that I previously showed was just that prepared horseradish that is grated, added with a little bit of vinegar, and kind of kept in a container that you'll use for things like your homemade horseradish sauce here. Horseradish sauce can be used for a variety of different ways. As I mentioned, it's traditionally used more as a condiment, like a fish dip sauce on burgers, but some people actually will mix it into mashed potatoes for less, kind of a nice little bite with your mashed potatoes. You could prepare a horseradish dressing for steak, and then generally your fresh horseradish, you could chop it up and mix it with your root vegetables, with some broccoli, Brussels sprouts, or whatever other type of veggies that you want to use it with. There are really no recommendations for home food preservation of canning. When we talk about canning horseradish, either whole or in a sauce, there's no recommended recipes. There is actually a recipe approved for refrigerated pickled horseradish sauce, though. but that would not be something that you would be able to can and keep on your shelf. You'd have to prepare that in usually smaller batches, and then it is stored in your refrigerator. That recipe for the refrigerated pickled horseradish sauce is at the National Center for Home Food Preservation's website, and that'll detail all the descriptions and everything that you need to know for that. You do have the ability to dehydrate horseradish if you choose to do so. If you are going to dehydrate, you need to make sure that you have adequate ventilation because those fumes are going to get very, very strong as that horseradish dehydrates and condenses down. Some key things to do when you're dehydrating is making sure that you're choosing good roots from harvest, that you're going to trim and scrub them, and then you're going to coarse or slice into 1/4 inch slices. You're going to place on your dryer sheets. Again, if you are grading it, you can't use kind of the traditional dryer mats or dryer shelving, if you will. You will have to put additional mat or parchment paper or something on it to keep it from falling through. You are going to cover the trays with plastic wrap or a roll-up sheet for your grated horseradish, and then dry until your horseradish is dry and brittle. Dried horseradish can be powdered by putting it into a blender and then rehydrating that powder with a little bit of water and adding to cocktail sauces, fish and meat sauces, and even salad dressings. So that's kind of the one way that dehydrated horseradish is used. There are some mixed reviews with preserving horseradish via freezing. Anytime you freeze, the texture does change, so those cell walls break, and then as it thaws, you're going to get some loss of water. So there is some mixed reviews. Some people say that preserving horseradish by freezing works well. They'll just grate it and then keep it frozen. Other people say that it changes the texture. So I think it really ultimately depends on what you're going to be using it for and what type of dish you're going to be mixing it into, if it will work or not. And I always just say you got to try it yourself sometimes to see if it works and if it's appealing and pleasing to you when you use it after it's been frozen. And once you do it once, if you don't like it, then you know that preserving horseradish via freezing is not going to be the method for you. Here's just a basic horseradish relish. Again, this is kind of just that sauce that can go on a variety of things. You're going to peel, grate your horseradish. You're going to mix it with that vinegar. Always very important to have that vinegar when you're using that freshly grated horseradish. And then you're just going to use some canning salt and some ascorbic acid. This, you can blend it in a mixer or to get that desired consistency if you want it a little bit chunky or if you want it completely smooth. The one thing here is that horseradish does fade. It loses its pungency. So when you're thinking of making a horseradish relish, it's not something that you're going to make and keep in your refrigerator for months and months and months. Really, you'll want to use that within the first 1 month, maybe 2 months. And that's even when it's stored in the refrigerator, it still loses its pungency. Here's a Zippy Dippy that is adapted from horseradish.org, and it uses low-fat cream cheese, non-fat Greek yogurt, some sharp cheddar cheese, Dijon mustard, your freshly grated horseradish, paprika, salt and pepper to taste, and then some green onions as an optional chopped on top. So you're just going to mix all of your ingredients together, beating the cream cheese until it's smooth, and then mixing in the other ones. And then you're going to use it as a dip for fresh crackers, bread, vegetables, whatever it is that you want. Or you could even use it as a sauce on sandwiches or wraps, whatever it might be. And then we have our Jezebel sauce. So we recently had this for our annual extension dinner, and it was well received. It's always one of the favorites of the Master Food volunteers, and it's a more southern condiment or dressing, but it just uses apple jelly and orange marmalade, or pineapple jelly works really good, especially if you're using it for pork. And then a 1/2 cup of your prepared horseradish, and then some yellow mustard. And you're basically just going to mix all the ingredients together, and you're going to store it in an airtight container. And as I mentioned, I did get that one recipe. Horseradish.org has a lot of great ways. If you're not traditionally one that uses a lot of horseradish, or you're looking for new inspiration for horseradish recipes, this website actually has a lot of pretty good recipes that you could learn more and try some of them. Personally, I'm not a fan of horseradish, so I don't cook a lot with it, but if you are, that website did find some very interesting ones. So then moving on to parsnips. Parsnips have a similar flavor to carrots, but they have definitely a little bit more of an earthy, nutty undertones. And of course, they're not the orange like our traditional carrots are. The interesting thing with our parsnips, so unlike our carrots, like carrots, the tops, you generally can use them as a condiment or to put as in mixed in with salads. They're edible. Where our parsnips, the leafy greens are not recommended to be consumed. There's some varieties that they say that they are okay, but a lot of the varieties, and especially the more wild parsnips type varieties, we definitely don't want to use them. So parsnips is one of those products that you don't want to use the whole plant. You just want to make sure that you're just using that root when you're preparing from a culinary perspective. We do know that our parsnips are really strong in nutrition. Well, at about 100 calories, 24 grams. They have a ton of fiber, more fiber than what your carrots do. So that's going to be 6.5 grams protein. It's a low protein vegetable, just like most of our vegetables are. It does provide quite a bit of our nutrients, so it provides 25% of our daily value of vitamin C and vitamin K, vitamin B6, 12%, zinc, 7%, magnesium, 10%, and folate, which is 22% of our daily value. So again, parsnips, great nutritionally, a lot of fiber, which we know as a society, we tend to not get very much fiber. So choosing parsnips over carrots is going to be a way to get a lot more of that fiber in. The health benefits, because of the high fiber content, it may reduce cholesterol. It helps to regulate your blood sugars, reduce your risk for heart disease, and improve digestion. But some of the other benefits is that because, again, antioxidants, you have a really high amount of vitamin C. It can help reduce the risk of certain chronic diseases and prevent illness due to those antioxidant contents that it has. Parsnips can be consumed raw, mashed, roasted, sauteed, boiled, baked, grilled, or fried, or really probably any other way in between. These are just some of the common ways. The interesting thing about parsnips is they do add, as I mentioned, they have that very earthy, nutty flavor compared to our carrots, which are generally a bit more sweeter and lighter. You can definitely puree them and add them to soups, stews, casseroles, gratins, and purees to add a little bit more of that rich flavor to a dish. You can also swap them for other root vegetables in dishes. So if a recipe uses only carrots, you could swap out half parsnips, half carrots, or you could swap out fully the carrots for the parsnips. Potatoes, turnips, those are also root vegetables that can be substituted out. So storing parsnips, we definitely want to remove those tops if they're present. Store in a sealed bag with a damp paper towel, and you're just going to wash and peel it when it's ready to be used. You can preserve parsnips by home canning methods. However, they generally suggest freezing to get your best result in your final product. So pressure canning, if you do canning, is the only safe method of canning. You are going to use it exactly like turnips, which is why this recipe says turnips, because it was just taken directly from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So you're going to wash your parsnips or turnips. It's the exact same method for both. And you're going to peel, slice, or dice, and then you're going to boil them for about 5 minutes. And you're going to hot pack, leaving that 1-inch head space. You're going to remove your air bubbles, and then you're going to process for 30 minutes for pints and 35 minutes for quarts. Now, the reason why the freezing is best is because you do have to process them for quite a bit of time, 30 to 35 minutes. So that texture just does change, and it doesn't quite as hold up as well as if you are going to freeze them. However, you can can them if you choose to. You can dry them as well. So you're going to arrange, you're going to blanch them, of course. Anytime you're doing any type of drying with most of our vegetables, you need to blanch them to A, preserve the color, B, lock in some of those nutrients, and C, give that first step of the softening to allow that drying to happen. You're going to dry at 140 degrees in an oven or your dehydrator. Dehydrators tend to work best, but if you don't have one, the oven works as well. You do want to turn those larger pieces every 3 to 4 hours just to help with that even drying process. And then, like most vegetables, it can scorch at the end of that drying process. So you want to monitor as it gets closer and closer to that end of the drying stage Total dry time can be anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, but it does significantly vary depending on your dehydrator. And then, as you can see right there, if you are doing it in the oven, it could take twice as long just because of how that process works. If you are drying your parsnips, they should be tough to brittle when they're done. You don't want any of that water remaining in your parsnips. It definitely deteriorates the quality and it makes them spoil faster. And then, as I mentioned, the freezing method is the preferred method over home canning. So you're going to select them. Again, it's the same process for turnips or parsnips. They're pretty similar. You're going to select the smaller medium, and then they are going to be washed and peeled. You're going to blanch them just for 2 minutes, and then you're going to put them in an ice bath to stop that cooking process. And then you're just going to pack them into whatever container you choose, making sure that you leave some headspace because of that expansion that will happen. So whether you use freezer-safe Ziploc bags, whether you use glass canning jars, whatever your method is, just making sure that you're having a little bit of that headspace to allow for that freezing to happen. And then to wrap up, we have just a few of our recipes here. So we have a honey glazed parsnips with ginger. So we're going to use about 2 pounds of parsnips with a little bit of butter. You could certainly use olive oil if you choose to, some low sodium chicken or vegetable broth, and then honey or maple syrup, whichever you choose or whichever you have on hand sometimes. And then you are going to use some ground ginger. This can be dried, or if you have fresh ginger, you can certainly use a little bit of that dehydrated ground ginger you made yourself, or you could do some fresh ginger, whatever your preference is. And then you're going to just salt it to taste with a little bit of that fresh ground black pepper. You're going to cut your parsnips into 1-inch chunks, and just to make sure that you have that even cooking time. And then you're going to just saute them in the pan with some butter or oil. You'll add that stock, honey, and ginger, and then basically you're going to reduce that down. So that liquid is all going to be cooked down, and that's going to take about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we have a roasted root vegetable with apple cider glaze. Again, this is using a combination of our root vegetables, but we have parsnips, carrots, red onion, and sweet potato. Basically, you take your 2 cups of apple cider, and then you are going to reduce that down to a syrup. So this will take a little bit of time. So if you are looking for a quick, easy meal, this one is going to take a bit because you're going to reduce that cider down until it's nice and syrupy. And then you're going to roast your sweet potatoes, parsnips, and carrots, just seasoned with a little bit of those spices listed on this page. And though that takes 20 to 25 minutes for that roasting process. And then you're going to drizzle to finish it off with that apple cider glaze. So it's still, if you did kind of both simultaneously, you might be able to get this done in 30 minutes with the chopping and the roasting. And then while the veggies are roasting is when you would reduce your apple cider to that nice syrupy glaze. And then, as I mentioned, parsnips are great for soups because they just add this nice earthiness. They really blend up really well. So you just cook your parsnips, onion, garlic, some red pepper flakes, and low sodium chicken stock or vegetable stock in a pot. You're going to cook them until they're nice and fork tender, the parsnips, and then you are going to add your milk. So we have 1.5 cups of milk. You could certainly use evaporated milk, fresh milk, half and half, whatever your choice is. And then you're going to make sure that you are blending that. So it works best if you have a blender, which because this will be a hot soup, you want to make sure that you have a blender that has a vent pipe open to allow that heat to come out and that steam to come out as you're blending. Or you can use kind of one of those stick immersion blenders that just go directly into the pot to blend it up. You can garnish with croutons, a drizzle of olive oil, some fresh green onions, whatever your choice is for the toppings to make it look nice and pretty and appetizing. And with that, that is the end of my part of this presentation talking about the nutrition and culinary uses for horseradish and parsnips. Here is my contact information as well as our Aim Good Health newsletter, which our December one will come out at the beginning of the month. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. As Chelsea mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to her. Also, if you have any more questions on growing things, feel free to throw those into the chat now. I did want to mention that Dig Your Dinner will be back in 2026. We've got a ton of topics that are already on our calendar. So if you go to the Joko KSRE webpage, you will find under the events tab everything that is listed for 2026. Coming up in January, we will be talking about honey. I believe it is peaches and plums in February. And then in March, we will be talking about asparagus. So lots of fun topics coming up. So with that, are there any further questions? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your days.